So let's try and get a sense here of what could this new story be. So let's begin, in a funny way in the middle. So let's see if we can get this. Okay. All of reality, and I want to try and cut through like tons of articles and tons of footnotes and just get to the core of it. And if I can ask you I promise not to charge you for a snack, right, that we're not paying for. But in other words, so if I just a little trust, I can't in the few minutes we have, right, and I'm tempted to, right, my body doesn't want to say something without ascribing, but I'm going to just try with permission, right? It's painful for me to do, but I'm just going to try and talk in the largest meta just to kind of touch the things, okay? So we can get a feeling of it. Is that okay? Okay. Wow. Boom. So the two basic properties of reality, right, all the way down and all the way up, are synergy and emergence. Synergy and emergence. Now, for how many people does that feel arousing? Let me say it again. No. Next time you're on a date, just try it. Synergy and emergence. It's very effective, right? Okay. Or you're with your wife, your partner, right? Try it. Just try it. Look at the person next to you. Try it. Synergy and emergence. See, it's hot, okay? And it's actually crazy hot, okay? So stay for a second, okay? And now by the end, trust me, you're never going to say any more touch me there. You're just going to say synergy and emergence. Okay, so here we go, okay? So what does synergy mean? Okay, what does synergy mean? Right? What moves reality is synergy. And what is synergy? So for example, a cell respirates, right? It means it breathes, right? The parts of a cell don't respirate. In other words, the cytoplasm, right? The organelles, right? The water, the DNA, all that stuff, at least in classical science, which is saying something real, right? The terms might not be right, but classical science is this very critical eye, right? And classical science is a form of intimacy with reality, which is gorgeous. So you can't ignore that intimacy, right? Science is driven by this insatiable, gorgeous curiosity at its best to become intimate with the structures of the physical cosmos. And science notices something correctly. So science says, oh, before it's a cell, that other stuff is not alive in a classical sense. And science is, that split between life and not life is a complex split. There's what to be said about it, but it's actually talking about something that's absolutely real, obviously, right? And so the parts of a cell, I'm just talking classical science now, the parts of a cell are not alive. Then those parts come together, they synergize, voila, you have a cell. And that cell is emergent, aka it's alive, right? It becomes a cell. And for example, it respirates, it breathes, right? And then that cell finds other cells, right? It becomes a collection of cells. And those collection of cells, for example, are Shati. Voila. Right? And it says, voila. If you pay extra, you pull it back. Watch. There we go. Right? Voila. Right? So a collection of cells. Now, an individual cell doesn't say voila. It doesn't do it. Right? But a collection of cells do, because that's a new emergent. So there's this process throughout reality, right, which is synergy. Now, what does synergy actually mean? So what synergy actually means is, and we're gonna go to a couple of movies here, but different kinds of movies in a second. But what synergy actually means is that there are invisible but actually demonstrable, accessible through the instruments of classical science. There are lines of allurement. There are vectors of allurement and autonomy, right? But there are vectors of allurement that actually move through and crisscross reality. And those vectors of allurement take separate parts, they bring them together, and this is what David Bohm was trying to express this. He couldn't quite get it before he died. But when he talked about there's a property of wholeness in cosmos, meaning those separate parts come together and they form new wholes. That's what synergy means. Synergy emerges a new whole. And the nature of a new whole is that it has properties that none of the parts have. Does everyone get that critical sentence? Right? The nature of a new whole is that it has properties that none of the individual parts have. And that is, right, the great gorgeousness of reality. That reality is a series of processes. If you had to break down reality and strip everything aside, reality is a movement of synergy, which is actually a movement of allurement, which takes separate parts and weaves them together, not in new complexities. Bad word. It's not new complexities. That's an exterior word. It doesn't describe what's happening, although it's true. It is more complex, obviously. But it's actually new intimacies. It's new intimacies. But for realsy, so let's just describe it for a second. We're gonna double down on this for a second. So what's intimacy? Right? What actually happens is reality is driven by this vector of allurements, right, which is animated by Eros, which brings separate parts into new wholes, which means new configurations of intimacy, or new configurations of Eros. And that Eros that animates the four forces, which are all attractive, right, allurement, autonomy forces, right, that Eros actually moves all the way up and all the way down reality. And it doesn't stop. Right, so for example, allurement, surprisingly enough, doesn't turn off. Right, so for example, how did you get to this room? What are you doing here? Let's make this real. Why are you here? You're here because it's the cheapest weekend around, or you didn't have anything left to do, and you thought, no, you're not here because of that. You're here because, if you actually cut through all the 17 reasons, you're here because, I'm here because, we're here because we were somehow allured to be here. And there's 10 reasons why it doesn't make sense to be here. For all of us. We all have 10 good reasons not to be here. Right? But we're here, if you actually check your interiority, because it lives in us, we're here because we're somehow allured. Right? We're allured. Because allurement didn't turn itself off. Right? Oh, right. Allurement did mitosis, meiosis, that amazing chlorophyll molecule, which was a great production, which generated photosynthesis, which was quite amazing. And it went all the way up through matter, life, and mind, and then it stopped at the human being. Allurement went home. Bye. Done. Bye. Going home. Really? This is just the dumbest idea in the world. Right? It's allurements moving. There's intellectual allurement. There's emotional allurement. There's aesthetic allurement. Right? There's somatic allurement. Right? There's lots of forms of allurement, obviously. But allurement's a structure of cosmos. And every single one of us is in this room because we were allured to be here. Right? We complimented Anami, am I pronouncing the name correctly? Yesterday on this beautiful place. Why are you running this beautiful place? You couldn't find anything better to do? Couldn't get a real job? Sorry, sister. Right? Well, because she was somehow, and we've never met, we've never talked, we know nothing about each other other than our shower conversation, which was public. I must just take a public conversation. Right, brother, right? But it's like, because somehow Anami was allured, right? She was allured to create the space. It's allurement. Let me create magic here. Right? And I can't quite explain why, and I probably had 18 other things I could have done. But actually, when I strip away all the explanations, there was a core allurement. Right? What is gravity, my friends? What is gravity? Gravity's just a fucking word. It's quite an important word. It's quite a critical word in science. It's important that science has precise words because it makes us more intimate with cosmos. But what's underneath gravity, friends? Let's get real. Nothing. Gravity's allurement. That's what it is. Gravity's allurement in the celestial sphere. Allurement playing with autonomy like it always does. And let's go subatomic. In the subatomic world, right? What is electromagnetic energy? Allurement. That's what it is, right? Underneath electromagnetic energy is what? Allurement. It's allurement all the way up and all the way down. And reality is the evolution of allurement. Interiors and exteriors, all the way up and all the way down. That's actually what reality is. And you know, I'll tell you something funny, right? I have a friend who you've met. Tell me how many people here know Venu, right? Just in the room, Venu, right? Is Venu awesome? Venu's awesome. Venu, by the way, calls me like 6 months ago. Venu's a great doctor. And you know, he's from a family of Indians who are all obviously obligated to be doctors. Everyone in his family is a doctor. His cousins are doctors. His father's a doctor. His mother, everyone's a doctor, right? It's kind of like the old Jewish thing, right? Mr. and Mrs. Goldstein, right, announced the birth of their son, Dr. Goldstein. It's now become Dr. Julapali, right? It's moved over, right? So Venu is a great doctor, and then he actually decided that he was going to go to law school. So he's now in law school, right? So he's in law school because he decided he needs to litigate cases for medical justice that he can only do if he's a great lawyer. It was very beautiful. Right? And so Venu came and slept on my couch while KK was working on the movie. I think you came back in the middle of, right? Venu came, can I see you there? You there? Right, there we go, right? So Venu came and he slept on the couch for like 9 days and in winter vacation. And I spend those 9 days trying to teach Venu, and I'm sharing this with Kirsten. I'm trying to share it with Kirsten, who's going to be brilliant at it in her own original, gorgeous, brilliant way. I'm trying to share with Venu and Kirsten a new way of writing science, which I've been working on for the last few years, meaning not mythopoetic writing of science, right, which is what Brian Swim does in the Universe Story people do. No, to actually write science, but actually don't take the words for granted. And it's when we use scientific words, right, in the scientific community, they're precise, but we actually forget what they're describing. So when we say gravity, you think, we're done, gravity. Electromagnetism, we're done. Well, no. What's gravity? It's allurement. What's electromagnetism? It's allurement. It's a dance between allurement and autonomy, and how does that work? And so I just want to look for a second when we say even just the simple thing, right, that a cell respirates, that a cell breathes, right, which is called, right, aerobic metabolism. So what does that mean? So what's respiration? So I just wrote down a few things, and we're going to show you a couple of clips just so we can kind of feel it, right? So let's just feel it for a second. Let's just play for a second, okay? Then we're going to look at a couple things. So I want to put two formulas on the board, but we're not going to use a board. We'll just write it in our hearts. And then we're going to just play with it for a second, then we're going to just see what it looks like, okay? So here's the first formula. This first equation, I want to call the Eros equation, right? It's an Eros equation. And let's say that Eros, and here's the equation, right? Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness. So Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, moving towards, seeking, desiring, ever deeper contact, and ever larger wholeness. That's a formula. Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, and this works in economics, and it works in physics, and it works in sociology, and it works in relationships, and it works in psychology. It's actually a little shocking, right? Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, whether it's my experience, right, Simona's experience, or the experience of a cell. And obviously there's continuity and discontinuity. You get those words, Flemish, right? Right, continuity and discontinuity between Simona and a cell, obviously. And there's continuity, and there's obviously evolution. We'll talk about that on Thursday. But for now, Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, seeking, moving towards, desiring, ever deeper contact, and ever greater wholeness. Wow. That's what Eros does. That's the nature of Eros, all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. So Eros is this movement driven towards, right, always seeking, but it's not just seeking, it's desiring. So for example, Alfred North Whitehead, who's a very, very proper, British man, right? And he's writing, 1910, right? And so when I started reading Whitehead a year ago, right, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, right, Whitehead talks about, he doesn't want to talk about desire. He doesn't talk about desire. He talks about the appetites, the appetition of cosmos. Proper British. The appetition of cosmos. Cosmos has appetites. And the appetite of cosmos, says Lord Whitehead, is for fuck, which he calls eros, his term, which I was delighted to see. So the appetite of cosmos is hungry. Right? It has desire. Desire is at the very heart of matter. Matter is inexplicable without desire. Matter desires to be God, actually. And to be God meaning to become music, right? To become Bach, to become moral reasoning, right? To become, right? So there's this process called Eros, and Eros is the very heart of reality, animating everything all the way up and all the way down. And Eros is always seeking deeper contact, so it wants to touch, right? This desire, which Whitehead called prehension, right? But actually, if you actually look more carefully, right, touch is a better word. It's the desire for deeper and deeper contact, more and more intense contact, and more intense contact generates a deeper synergy, right? And synergy brings the parts of a cell together to generate a new emergence, a new wholeness, which is a cell that respirates. Now, another way to say that is that Eros is always searching for greater intimacies. Now, what does intimacy mean? And I sat with my friend Ervin Laszlo, and KK, you remember we sat with him over, 4 dinners? And he just said, we can't use the word intimacy. I can't use that word. It's like, can't talk about that. Because he kept thinking intimacy, right, human sexuality. And he couldn't see, okay, no, intimacy is the structure. And we kept going back and forth around it, right? And intimacy is the structure of reality. So what does intimacy mean? Right? When words lose their meaning, reality collapses, right? A paraphrase of Thucydides in the Peloponnesian Wars. So here we go.